when we look at the evolution of pet food, of course, at first, pets were just gradually entering our household or were kept for a certain purpose, and we just fed them something, and they usually have to find part of their food by themselves. And we gradually developed in the recent past, like kibbles and canned food and things like that. And we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning by not knowing the true nutrition physiology of those animals.
We're here with Dr. Corbee today, and we're going to discuss current research from around the world, in this case, the Netherlands, and how it might apply to innovative pet products and the pet food science industry. So I'm your host, Dennis Jewell, and had the distinct pleasure again of speaking with Dr. Corbee. So we're going to talk about pet nutrition, and I wonder if we could just start, if you would tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the position, maybe what you're currently doing there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis, for this nice question. My career made several jumps, but from the second year in vet school, when I was in Utrecht, I decided to become a veterinary nutritionist. So I was very much intrigued by the subject of nutrition, and I was a bit disappointed on the way it was taught to us. So I thought I could do a better job to make nutrition more sexy and make it more appealing to our students. And I had my thoughts about it and really wanted hands-on to work with nutrition. So when I graduated from vet school, the nutrition professor at that time thought I was the stubborn person who thought he could do better. So he didn't really support me in that matter. I jumped into a different career as being a general practitioner at a practice which was close to us. And then I decided to start my own practice, because also in practice I saw things happening which I thought I could do better. So I started my own private practice, and then at a certain time there was a new nutrition professor in Utrecht, and there was a position for a residency, and then I jumped in. So despite having my own private practice just up and running, I decided to go for a nutrition residency, and then followed by a PhD. Then I sold my practice and stayed in academia because I really liked the teaching, doing research, and also the clinical work, which is perfectly at the academia position.
Well, that's great. I wonder if you could sort of talk, I look at your research, and you've done a fairly broad research, nutrition research, but certainly you've done some vitamin D, calcium work, there's a lot of interest in that, and a lot of interest in obesity, and you've done that. And then we haven't talked in this podcast much about the importance of that early nutrition, and that paper you wrote, or you were a co-author on, where looking at the effects of maintaining mother's milk for a while. Those are all interesting subjects. I wonder if you might just talk about what you've seen as interest in your recent career, what you would like to tell the people about that is exciting in pet nutrition today from your perspective.
So if I want to talk about everything I think is exciting about pet food, we need several days or months.
Well, we'll plan that. We'll have a hierarchy. Start at the top.
We'll have to keep it a bit brief and a bit concise, I think. So more to the point, when I started doing research in pet nutrition, I started because my supervisor was an orthopedic surgeon on work on nutrition and skeletal health.
Now, was that Dr. Hoswinkel? I've forgotten.
Yeah, it was.
Who was your supervisor then?
Professor Hoswinkel was my supervisor in nutrition. He's a diplomat of the European College of Nutrition, de facto because of his work on calcium and vitamin D. And our nutrition professor is an animal scientist, so that's why he couldn't be a diplomat of the college. But he also supports me in this this matter. So I started working with an orthopedic surgeon. So of course, nutrition had to be related to skeletal health. And one of my first papers was on looking at puppy milk replacer to see how much calcium and vitamin D was actually in there compared to the claimed amounts, and to have an idea on what breeders are giving to large breed puppies regarding these puppy milk replacers. And it turned out that they used quite high amounts, and that there were quite significant amounts of vitamin D and calcium in those puppy milk replacers, which might end up getting in too high amounts, which may cause skeletal diseases. So that was then the start for me. Then I moved on of course, other studies on calcium and vitamin D. So we looked at dogs with Cushing's disease, and we looked at the alterations in calcium metabolism there. And it turned out that in dogs, there's actually not much going on. So in people, we see osteoporosis due to Cushing's disease, and we couldn't demonstrate that in dogs with Cushing's disease. So they have kind of local production of growth hormone and IGF, which makes enough, which supports enough the bone metabolism to remain stable and to not develop osteoporosis. So that was an interesting finding. That was actually data that was already collected by Mariana Trifonidou, who was one of my other supervisors. She did a lot of work on vitamin D, and everyone was always disappointed that this work was not really appreciated by the pet food industry. So she proved that excessive amounts of vitamin D might be harmful, but despite her research being performed, this was not taken up in several nutritional guidelines. So when I worked on this...
Let's talk about that in a minute. So that was done in the puppy. So it was excess vitamin D for growth, right? So it's very different than vitamin D. Currently, we're talking about vitamin D and immune response and the positive effects higher levels might have as compared to these effects during the growth. Which when I was on the USDA or the AFCO subcommittee, nutrition subcommittee, we used those data to set a higher level of vitamin D. But I think for puppies, I'm kind of, what do you think about that puppy versus adult for upper level? Sort of safe and not too high.
So, of course, there's differences. That's why we distinguish between growth phase and adults, of course. So, yes, indeed, it might be that there's a difference in the need and also in the maximum level of vitamin D. We know, and I published a review paper together with some colleagues as well on non-skeletal effects of vitamin D. And it has a lot of benefits if you supplement vitamin D, especially in deficiency. We see a lot of health issues occurring. So we think supplementation might be beneficial, and there's some evidence for that as well within certain diseases. So indeed, it might be that adults have more benefit of the supplementation, whereas in puppies we tend to supplement too much.
Yeah. Especially large breed, right? From your work and others, that those large breed, high growing bones, they have a sensitivity to over supplementation, don't they?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Their bone metabolism is very tight, so they really have to develop in a short period of time and really grow fast, and that's why it easily gets out of balance. So you easily have too much or too little of certain nutrients to support skeletal health. Yeah.
Well, what do you think about the sort of recent work that has been done in phosphorus? Does that relate to work you've done with sort of calcium phosphorus balance, this influence of phosphorus on renal? How do you view that?
So calcium is very tightly regulated, whereas phosphorus kind of lags behind of that. So it kind of follows calcium in a lot of pathways. So I didn't do much research on the phosphorus side, but there is a lot of relation with calcium work for sure. So it's very interesting also to see the different forms in which phosphorus is administered that kind of makes a difference. So that also makes you wonder
Yes.
whether calcium in that particular form also might be different than calcium in an inorganic way.
Well, I've really never thought about that. We usually use like calcium carbonate or dicalcium phosphate, pretty available, but the phosphorus side, they've got everything from bone to phos acid or something that really different bioavailabilities.
Yeah, so there's way much more to it than the simplification we have with the nutrient requirement tables. And that's something which also relates to the paper I published on vitamin A and vitamin D interactions in cats. So, yeah.
Well, tell us about that. That's interesting.
So we designed that study actually based on very old data, skeletons that were digged up at the Maas River here in Netherlands. And these were skeletons of monks, and they had kind of spurs on their vertebrae. So they had exostosis, a lot of bony development on the vertebrae in cervical spine. And we know similar defects occur in cats that consume large amounts of vitamin A. It's described in cats that are fed solely on liver. So the idea was that these monks were eating a lot of fish, a lot of salmon liver, and then got a lot of vitamin A and then developed those exostoses. And we were trying to find the underlying mechanism and to see if in healthy adult cats we were able to evoke these lesions by feeding them a lot of vitamin A. And we did that just adding vitamin A. We had a control group, but we also had a group where we gave extra vitamin D to the safe upper limit, and also a group where we added the same amount of vitamin D which is actually present in raw liver and the same amount of vitamin A present in raw liver, to see whether the concentration matters and whether the interaction with vitamin D matters. And the funny outcome of this study was actually that we did not see any skeletal lesions. Only the ones that had some osteoarthritic-like lesions developed more severe bony protrusions, but it was very minor. And the most significant findings were actually in the liver, where we saw fibrosis occurring. And that's something which is also known of vitamin A toxicity. But the fun fact here was that if you add vitamin D, vitamin D had a protective effect on the fibrosis and also on a dose.
That's interesting.
So with the lower level, it had a protective effect, whereas when you gave it in an excessive amount, it was no longer able to have this effect on the fibrosis.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Isn't that sort of open the window into nutrition that talks about this balance of nutrients? Like you said, we so often, we try to make that balance, but there's a lot of things in play there, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's often overlooked or maybe even ignored by the industry, because I thought that this could even be a game changer to start looking more at nutrient interactions, to redefine our nutrient requirement tables and things like that. But it takes time, and now we see with the phosphorus work indeed that we also look at interactions with calcium. So it's going to change the research we are doing, because traditionally we were mostly focused on preventing deficiencies, whereas now we know that excessive amounts are not healthy either, and that there are interactions there, but still a lot of it is unknown. So there's way more work to be done.
Yes.
By us.
So you have a good career ahead of you. I overspoke you on time, but I just wanted to smile. As a nutritionist, that must be kind of exciting to see that those pathways open up and say, okay, we're there's still some things about, minimum requirements we need to know. But this idea of not too much and the optimum space, there's a lot of unknown there, isn't there?
Yeah, totally true. Yeah.
How do you think that relates to obesity? We've been, so sure, of course, that over consuming calories is the cause of excess adiposity, and yet, obesity is more complex than just second law of thermodynamics. What do you think? How have you approached it as a research scientist?
So I did several studies on obesity, looking at risk factors like my obesity in show dogs, obesity in show cats articles, where we kind of also looked at the breed standards, what we think is normal or what we think is ideal might not be the ideal for the health. So there's a lot of debate.
Yes.
Going also on other diseases, of course, but I focused on obesity. Prevention is very important. So we looked at the effects of prolonged giving mother milk, because that might also have an effect. And we indeed could demonstrate in cats that if they suckle longer with their mother, and they have a lower risk of overweight and obesity later in life. So there's something there as well. And there's a lot of psychology when it comes to management. So I wrote a nice paper with a pediatrician from Seattle, whom I met in London, actually, on a human obesity conference. And I was the only veterinarian talking there. And he was intrigued by the fact that I demonstrated so many similarities between childhood obesity and obesity in pets that he thought we should team up and write an article together. And that's what we did. So we saw the similarities, and we have an idea on how we can tackle the problem, at least part of it, because it's really tough to get weight off animals, because we have this strong connection with our pets, just like with our children. We don't want to withhold them treats. We want them to
right,
because we enjoy seeing them eat, because we think eating is healthy. But eating too much is not healthy anymore. And snack should be something very special. But we think our children and also our pets deserve treats every day, and that's not healthy anymore. So we kind of addressed that topic there with a lot of citations, quotes by parents and pet parents to substantiate our ideas and thoughts about that.
Well, if you would make recommendations, sort of on the nutritionist side, and then maybe go on to those recommendations for pet parents, well, what would they be? How might we achieve that healthy pet we're hoping to find, maybe not finding?
So we need to be aware of risk factors and to prevent animals from getting obese in the first place. So keeping growth charts, doing body condition scoring on a regular basis, and teach pet owners how to do body condition scoring and what is healthy and what is unhealthy can already make a huge difference, because treating obesity is very difficult, but preventing it is easier. I will not say it's very easy. It's still tough because it's always tempting to look at those puppy eyes or those kitten eyes and give them a bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, we really need to prevent it from occurring, to make sure that we have less overweight and obese dogs and cats, because it's really a huge problem. If you see the numbers of the pet obesity prevention group, it's enormous. It's more than half of our pets currently being overweight or obese in the Western world. So we really have to counteract that. And it's, in my opinion, the focus should be mostly on prevention.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. What sort of foods might you recommend for that prevention or in the treatment, aid in the management of obesity?
So it's all about making healthy choices. So it's choosing the right food in the right amounts. It's the same with snacking. We should use healthy snacks, preferably, and they should be still appealing to the pet as well. So we tended to make diets as palatable as possible. So we put in a lot of fat and a lot of protein, and especially fat contains a lot of energy. So yeah, by making it also very highly digestible, very nutrient dense kibbles, it's easier to overeat compared to a canned food, or if we look at like prey feeding, then there's way more to it. It's way more volume. It's less easy to digest, so it stays longer in the stomach. So all these mechanisms can help maybe to prevent obesity from occurring, so to keep the stomach more busy. But yeah, of course, feeding prey also has a risk of bacteria, so that's something we might need to mimic in a different way. But there are so many mechanisms involved. This is just one aspect of it. So maybe less energy dense foods, more fiber, making sure it stays longer in the stomach. It might be a way to go.
Sure, that makes sense, right? And it has value in a number of ways. Slower the nutrient passage, and then the subsequent bacterial postbiotics are often satiety. GLP-1 goes up with those bypass fibers. What do you think about sort of the other nutrients we might add? Carnitine, or other sort of anti-obesity, energy burning kind of things. Do you have any opinion on them?
So there have been studies done on the use of carnitine. Everyone wants to find the medication or the nutrient that will prevent obesity from occurring, or that will really help to burn the fat off. And with carnitine being part of the carnitine shuttle, so to shift the fatty acids over the mitochondrial membrane into beta oxidation, might be a way to go to, but you need to give very high amounts before that mechanism becomes overt, and you have to stimulate beta oxidation, because carnitine is produced in sufficient quantities with normal activity, with normal food intake. So if there's extra demand for beta oxidation because of fasting or because of strenuous exercise, then it's beneficial to add carnitine to maintain a better muscle to fat ratio within the body. But it was not proven to be effective to really speed up weight loss. And that's what people often think. We give something which helps to burn the fat, but it helps to maintain the muscle and to reduce some of the fat. But the overall weight of the overall rate of weight loss is actually the same.
So then it comes back to a nutrition plus exercise, maybe some sort of exercise with your pet program seems like a positive thing. I know in many human weight loss and research I've done shows that benefit to have that human animal exercise going on together.
Yeah, so exercise is a very important component of weight loss programs, especially because it improves metabolic health. So it reduces risk of stroke in people. It reduces risk of insulin resistance. So it has a lot of benefits. It trains the muscle. But to really burn the fat off, you really have to exercise a lot. So the major contributor to weight loss from an energy perspective still is changing the food. You will achieve much more by dietary restriction to reduce the amount of kcals than to get that from doing exercise. And especially in an obese cat, try to make them move and really do strenuous exercise for a long time. That's a no-go.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And we keep looking for that 0-calorie cookie, don't we?
Yeah.
I'm finding it very easily. What other areas might we talk about? Any other, as you look forward in your nutritional program, what are you most interested in investigating?
So obesity remains a very strong topic. So it's really a problem, and also translational. So that to not only combat it in pets, but also in children, and to prevent obesity in people is something which is still very important and has my attention. And yeah, I'm still regarded as one of the specialists when it comes to nutrition and skeletal health. So I do a lot of research on like new nutraceuticals on osteoarthritis, effects of calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D on skeletal health, but also vitamin A still has my interest, and there's still ongoing research coming from me regarding those nutrients.
It sounds pretty exciting. I look forward to that. Let's talk a little bit about teamwork and the value of working together with people. What do you look for as someone who you might want to bring onto your team or have as an associate? What would be characteristics that look like that would be a success?
So when I look at myself, I wasn't a very good student. So I was kind of stubborn, enjoying
I don't
life.
believe that. What do you even mean?
And so, yes, I had several retakes. So I was not the brilliant guy on everything. And we often tend to seek those people that really get the high marks, that always perform best in class. But for me, more important, and that was the same for nutrition, and why I'm regarded really a global expert on nutrition, is because it really has my interest, and I'm really enthusiastic about it. I'm curious. I want to know more. So these are the things I'm looking for: people that are enthusiastic, that really find it very exciting to see what food can do. So I tend to seek that, and that's more important than the grades you got. So that's an important message.
That's very interesting.
A lot of people that want to become a specialist, they really think, and they really struggle, because they think they need the high grades and they need to have excellent performance in class to be able to achieve that goal. And that's why we have high burnout rates, and that's not needed. So you need to outperform the others by giving a strong motivation why you want to do this. If you grab me by that, then I'm more than happy to support you. And that's actually how I got my first PhD candidate and resident, who came from Italy for an internship. And he already had strong motivation for his internship, and he demonstrated me his eagerness to learn more about this during his internship. And that's why, in the end, I supported him all the way through his residency and PhD.
It sounds like good success. And I want to talk about it a little bit, because to me it is such a fascinating thing that the nutrition that our pets eat actually changes the metabolism. In the area of fatty acids, where I've done much of my work, the capacity exists to elongate and desaturate and to metabolize fatty acids, and yet the fatty acids consumed are tremendously important in the subsequent metabolism and sort of health of the pet. And that's so exciting, isn't it? Just to see how that interaction of food and life happens. What do you think?
Yeah, so we when we look at the evolution of pet food, of course, at first pets were just gradually entering our household, or were kept for a certain purpose, and we just fed them something, and they usually have to find part of their food by themselves. And we gradually developed in the recent past, like kibbles and canned food and things like that. And we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning by not knowing the true nutrition physiology of those animals. So we had like a taurine deficiency in cats, and all these basic problems that we now are well aware of. But at that time point, we didn't know. We thought they were little humans and needed the same food as we did, but they are different. So these
Well, like
species.
taurine, we've had taurine. I'm sorry, we're supposed to, but with taurine, so interesting because we had taurine in the foods, but we didn't have enough, and we didn't realize that taurine wasn't as bioavailable as we thought. So suddenly, the academics came in and said that was University of California, Davis, Quentin Rogers and his group, and it's just required, just go do it. And of course, we all did immediately, just crash. Everybody's adding taurine.
So there's so much things that you can learn from just looking at nutrition physiology. On a lot of, I'm a comparative nutritionist, so I work with all kinds of species, also in the zoo, and it's often you can find basic mistakes we make by getting them out of their normal environment and feeding them something which we think is best, but nature always knows better. And I'm intrigued by exploring these things and seeing miracles happen as soon as you restore that balance and see those animals recover and prevent future animals from getting ill. So that's really intriguing. It's the same with the fatty acids, the long chain fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids. They are not in sufficient quantities in the diets often, and that's why supplementation is so successful in managing many diseases, because there seems to be kind of a lack, and if we jump into that just by giving a different diet or a supplement, we can restore the balance and make sure these animals live longer and happier lives. And that's what makes me get out of bed every day.
No, isn't that great? So if I could just push that a little bit, so you're really saying that nutrition, as it's developed from meeting the minimum requirements, is now really looking at a balance of all the nutrients and ingredients present for that optimum health. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we need to find the optimum, and there's way more to it than just looking at the nutrients. So it's also the interactions. It's getting everything in the proper amounts. How do you say? It all has to do with a balance, and it should also be palatable. Say. Also because we now live differently with our pets than we did in the past. So we keep them indoors, we keep them sometimes even in our beds, we allow them to lick our faces. That brings new challenges, so we can't totally mimic what happened in nature. We altered our animals and the way we are handling them, so we need to find ways around it to make sure that they meet most of their needs, and which also fits the way we want them to be.
Well, we have changed, haven't we? And clearly that optimum for an animal that is out hunting and has a very short life, mostly built around reproduction, is very different than our pets' lives, who are very long-lived and often not reproducing. So it's nutrients, of course, change, and that optimum has to change with it.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. Most species live to the survival of the species and not to the survival of the individual, and that's what we want for our pets. So I often tell people that really want to go natural that if they have a dog or cat with like renal failure, if we keep on feeding it the natural way, it will die quickly and in a lot of discomfort. So we better start now feeding something which is, in your opinion, more artificial, but it's more beneficial to your pet to make sure that it lives a longer, happier life. So indeed, it's customized also on the purpose why we are keeping the pets.
No, I love that view because the optimum output for an animal in the wild is reproduction, and of course that healthy and a long relationship we desire from our pets. That's a different goal, isn't it? It's going to take different nutrition.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, I often ask, and I wonder if you could just talk about a little bit. Do you have a text that you like, that you think, if I'm reading, I want to think, Dr. Corbee, I can't see you individually, but I'd read maybe something you recommend, or even that you wrote as a nutrition text. What would you recommend?
Well, that's a tough one because a lot of text is already outdated as soon as it's published. So yeah, sometimes it
Or do you prefer the literature then to follow that most recent
yes.
work if you're working with students?
Yes, I always tell my students to be critical and to look at recent literature because there's a lot of changes ongoing in the field. So if you want to be updated, then you need to go really into scientific articles. Of course, there's very nice textbooks, and there are several ones, and some companies have really invested a lot in having a lot of state-of-the-art authors there to write excellent chapters on the current insights we have at the time they wrote the book on certain topics, and they might still be up to date for many of them. So I really like those textbooks because they give backgrounds. Some of them are more focused on the clinical aspects, others more on giving a total overview. So there's a lot of textbooks to choose from depending on what you are looking for. So very practical information or more background. And if you want to be totally up to date or have your own individual opinion, which is very important for my students as they are in academia, I always tell them to do your own research and then come with your own opinion, which might even be different than my opinion. That's okay. That's how it goes in research.
Well, it's a general truth of science, isn't it? That it's not conflict, but that comparison and interaction really sharpens the whole group and pulls us along, doesn't it? If we all thought that we had all the answers all the time, we wouldn't be doing research.
Yep.
I think we've had a great conversation. Thank you, Dr. Corbee, for your insights. It's sure been a pleasure for me. I wonder if you have any last just thoughts as you think about pet nutrition and the overview, the 10,000-foot view. What would you say? Where are we headed? What is there new ideas out there, new ways of looking at pets and their nutritional needs? What's your view?
So my view is that there's still a lot of challenges in nutritional management of pets, and that might also translate to people. So pets can be very good models for also human diseases. So I think we have a lot of things to learn from each other and look at species differences. It's still such an exciting field. There's so much more. We still need to learn to totally understand nutritional needs, the effects of nutrient on metabolism, how we can change things for the good, also for the different purposes that we are keeping the animals for. So yeah, a bright future for pet nutrition, also for nutrition as a whole.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work in pushing that future illumination out. So I'll look forward to it. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk again. I hope to have that opportunity if you can find time.
For sure. Thank you so much.